Hello everybody, it's Hannah. Today I will be teaching you guys, just talking about how to take notes. Now I know there are many styles of note taking, but this is more of a general style that I use, although I do mix it up or use different stuff depending on what subject it is. So I usually just start out with a header in calligraphy or something, and then a little highlighter just to kind of bring out the header and the top of the page. And then I always write the date in the top right and the chapter and section in the top left. So next, I usually write a small paragraph or kind of main idea of the header or topic in general. So if I'm ever referring back to these notes, the top header kind of just explains what they're about or kind of just what's going to be on the notes. So after I do that, I usually write out a subheader depending on what kind of chapter, like what the main idea of the main header is, usually in highlighter, and then I start bullet points on the subheader. So typically I write between anywhere from like 2 to 5 bullet points depending on the subject or topic. And then if I'm going to write out an important term, I usually write the important term with a colored pen, usually the same color as the highlighter, and then define it next to it in the bullet point. And this way I just kind of, the important terms really pop out and I can refer back to them later. And then if there's enough room or information on a bullet point to go to the very end of the page, I typically start the next line slightly over to the right, just to kind of define where the bullet point starts and the amount of text. It kind of just looks more defined. So next, I typically use an arrow to add on to information that is in the main bullet point. So if it talks about something, I might add an example using an arrow and also with the colored pen. So depending on what subject it is, you might have example problems. If you're in math, typically, or maybe in science, you might have example problems and you can work them out. I usually start them slightly to the right as well and just kind of write out my problem, and then I usually always box the final answer, usually in math. But once that is complete, I usually add more bullet points or I'll go on to the next subheader. So just as with the first subheader, I typically start off with some bullet points or even a short paragraph just on the subheader, and it really depends on what the topic is about, whether I'll do bullet points or write some kind of short paragraph. But I'll usually pick between one or the other unless something else pops up as I'm taking notes. So here I showed what I usually do when there's a diagram. I typically draw the diagram right in the middle of the page, or a picture or some kind of graph that relates to the header, and then if there is some information within the diagram, I usually point it out with a little arrow using the colored pen. So next I just go on to write more bullet points normally, or then something else like maybe an example problem. And then another key tip I do is I underline a term to add emphasis or an important term. So usually after a couple more bullet points, if an example problem comes up, typically when they're smaller example problems, I try to split them halfway through the page so one example doesn't take up the whole space. And just more of a smaller example problem, but typically these are in math or some other kind of class. So after all my information is down, I will normally write out a summary based on the header and the subheaders that were included in the text, and I'll also point out maybe an important term or formula or something that I might need to remember or refer back to later when studying for a test or just kind of revisiting the information on the page. And I just kind of reflect on how the main header relates to the subheaders and vice versa. So here is the finished product of my notes, and again it varies between which kind of notes you're taking for, like what class or just the overall style. You could obviously change up the colors, the way you do this, or add different stuff, but this is my general outline and tips. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you again.